Hello guys, welcome to the last video of the CSS Crash Course, and in this lesson we're going to be looking at pseudo classes and how we can use them to make our projects a little more dynamic. So just quickly before we get started guys, if you are interested in learning about web development, please consider subscribing to the Code Lab channel as I post weekly content on many different topics of web development so we can get you on the road to building your dream project. Now with that out of the way, the first question you likely have is, what is a pseudo class? Now a pseudo class or a CSS pseudo class are just special keywords added to a selector. So this can be an ID or a class you created, or it could just be an element, so like an anchor tag or a paragraph tag. And what pseudo classes do is just add special effects to that selector, and you can almost think of them as an extension. And the way we implement a pseudo class is by using a colon after the selector, then followed by the specific keyword you'd like to use. Now there are many different pseudo classes, too many to cover in this video, but I will be going over some of the more commonly used ones. So the first one we're going to be looking at is the hover class. Now the way the hover pseudo class works in CSS is that you apply it to a selector, and when the mouse cursor hovers over this, it then becomes active and changes its state. And what we can do is actually style this state, and you'll commonly see this associated with links or buttons. So let's dive into VS Code now and see what this looks like. So we're back in our CSS reference box, and you can see we have a button here, or a link in this case, which I've styled like a button, and I've given it a class of button1. And currently there is no hover state on this button, and it's essentially just static. Now if I had a hover pseudo class to this, so I'm just going to go underneath this, and the way we apply it is first we put the selector, in this case the class, colon, and then hover, and then curly braces, and let's just change the background color. So I'm going to say background color to red, and once I hover over this, you can see now that the hover class is active and the background color changes and it becomes much more dynamic. And that's how we can implement the hover class in an element. And remember guys, it's really important that it only becomes active once we hover over the elements. So the next pseudo class you're going to be looking at is the active pseudo class. Now what this does is change the appearance to a link, similar to hover, but it's only activated after being clicked, not hovered, and it's usually only seen for a split second. And what it does is just provide a visual feedback that the element indeed was clicked. And you'd most typically see this used in an anchor tag. So let's dive back into VS Code and see an example. Okay, so we're inside VS Code, and as you can see, I've pretty much just duplicated this button here, but just changed a few contents and also given it a different class of button2, and then just applied some different styling to this one. Now what we're going to do is use the active class. So when we click onto this, it's going to push down so it looks like we're interacting with it. Now the way we do this is we give this a position relative, and if you watched the previous lesson, you know now with position relative we can use sub properties to style this and move it around. So we're going to do that with the active class. So first you need to grab the selector, which is button2, and then colon and say active, hit enter, and then in here we use the sub properties of top, and we're just going to say 1 pixels. And if I click on this, you can see now it's giving us some feedback, and it's showing that the element's being clicked on and kind of giving us the impression that it's being pushed in a 3-dimensional space. Now the active state of this is really short-lived and barely a split second if I just click once. Now unlike the hover class where if I just leave the mouse on it, it's constantly in that state, whereas to activate the active class I've got to click on the actual element, which you can see here. And that's how we can apply an active class to one of our buttons or link tags. And the next pseudo class we're going to be looking at is the focus pseudo class. Now this is used for styling an element that is currently targeted by the keyboard or activated by the mouse. So similar to active, that it is activated when it's clicked on. However, once something is in focus, it stays active until you click on something else. So let's dive into VS Code and look at an example. So in our example here, we've got another anchor tag with similar styling to the two above. It's just got a different color. Now when we're looking at this, it currently has no focus and no other state, and it's pretty much just static and just existing. Now the focus class, we can add another style or state similar to hover and active class. So I've given it some styling already here, but now let's use the focus class. So I'm going to grab the selector, which in this case is button3, and then colon, and then focus. So now let's apply a focus class. So I'm just going to change the background color to orange, and if I click on this, you can see now that the background color has changed to orange. And right now I can move my mouse away and it doesn't change state, it's focused on that state, and it will stay in this state until I click onto something else. So if I just click away, you can see now it reverts back to its original state. Now this sometimes cultivates the illusion that focus and active are the same, but they're not the same. So when we click on this button, you can see now it's in focus and will remain in focus until I click on something else. Whereas if I click this active class, it's only active once clicked on. Once I unclick, it will go back to its original state and will no longer be active. For it to stay active, I've got to keep the mouse down. Whereas with focus, I just click on it once and it's now in that state permanently until I click onto something else. And that's how we can use the focus class to style our elements. And the last pseudo class we're going to be looking at, guys, is the first and last child. Now the first and last child are pretty self-explanatory when you look at the contents of parent and child elements. So when things are nested inside a parent element, they become child elements. And what you can do, as you might have guessed, is we can style the first and last child of these elements inside the parent. So let's dive into VS Code now and see an example. So if we look at our example here, we've got an unordered list and 4 list items, and then you can see it here in our browser. So we've got bread, milk, tea and biscuits. Now let's just say we wanted to style the first list item here of bread. If we were to write it out, so we'll go inside the style sheet and just say li and say color red, you can see this isn't giving us the effect we want and all the list items are now red. That's because it's grabbing all the list items. So if we wanted to style the first list item differently, we're going to have to use the first child pseudo class. So what we do is just grab the li, colon, so we know we're going to use a pseudo class, enter first child, and if you look in our browser you can see now the first list item is red. Now we can do the same thing for the last list item, so I'm just going to duplicate this and I'm going to say last child, and let's just change the color of this one to green. It doesn't really matter, but we'll just change it to green. And you can see now that the first and last child of the UL now have different stylings. And that's how we can apply styling to the first and last child of a parent element. Now those are just some of the pseudo classes we can use, guys, and this was just a basic overview of some of them. But you can get really creative with pseudo classes and you can really bring your projects to life and make them more interactive. But that will be all for this video, guys, and this was also the last topic of the CSS Crash Course. Again, I really hope you enjoyed the video and enjoyed the course, and I hope you got some value from these videos. If you did, please hit the like button and please consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.